spear gun safety. What does it mean? Today we're going to go over the ins and outs of using your spear gun, transporting it in and out of the water, and storing it safely. So Riffe does its best to engineer a reliable and safe product, but at the end of the day, there's one thing you can't account for, and that's human error. So here's a couple tips to prevent having any kinds of issues with your spear gun. Like any gun, a spear gun should always be treated like it's loaded. You should always be aware of where the muzzle and the shaft are pointing, and you should always be aware of where your finger is around the trigger. So here we are, we're gonna go for a quick dive here. A quick local dive, and as you can see, there's no one around, but I position that gun in a way that the tip's not near anyone and I don't have to worry about poking anyone with that spear tip. Your spear gun is not designed to ever be shot out of the water. Hey. If you were to shoot your spear gun out of the water, there's a high chance that the gun will recoil back and hit you possibly in the face. And there's also a strong chance that the shaft will go much further than anticipated, causing injury or some kind of damage to anything in front of it. I am suiting up, getting ready to go dive, check it out. I leave the gun unloaded as I'm transiting through the surf zone. You can see there's not a lot of surf today, but there's enough that if that gun were to be loaded right now, there's a good chance that I could bump the trigger, it could go off. It's just much safer and more controlled to get through this whole surgy section. You can see here I just find a deep section where I can slide my fins on, kick out away from the surf until I'm in a good position. That was a big one, obviously. Got rolled over, glad the gun wasn't loaded for that. All Riffe spear guns are designed with an easily operable safety that allows you to fix the shaft so that it's stuck in the mechanism so that the gun can't accidentally be discharged. At any time when you're loading your spear gun, you should first make sure that the safety is on to prevent any accidental misfiring. Just remember, before you take that shot on the fish of a lifetime, make sure you disengage that safety. The next thing to remember is to never leave a loaded spear gun unattended. For instance, let's say you found some shell or something you wanted to pick up on the bottom of the ocean and you had your spear gun, you wanted to set it on the bottom for a minute. Always unload your spear gun first. That way there's no chance that your spear gun rolling around on the bottom could misfire and possibly cause injury or damage some unintended animal. There's all kinds of videos on the internet of people leaving spear guns unattended, rolling around the bottom, or people firing spear guns out of the water. These are both super unsafe practices that we highly recommend never doing yourself. The next thing to consider, whether in or out of the water, never point your spear gun at a person. Always be very aware of where the tip of your gun is and where you're pointing it. Whether you're swimming around in the water, especially this is something we see with new divers who are still kind of learning the ins and outs of just being in the water with all the gear. It's very often or common for them to kind of let the muzzle of the gun kind of drift over towards their buddy. Super dangerous. Always be in control of that muzzle and be thinking about where it's pointing. In addition, out of the water, when you're just carrying your gun around, for instance, I like to pretty much set mine up on my shoulder when I'm walking down a trail. Just make sure that there's nobody coming down the trail right behind you. Just make sure you pick the safest direction possible for this tip, because even unloaded, it can do a lot of damage.
Whoa!
Once you're in the water and you're ready to load your spear gun, always check that the shaft is securely in the mechanism before pulling the bands back. So when you push that shaft in, you'll feel a click. And then when you pull out on it now, you'll feel that shaft coming up against the mechanism. You shouldn't be able to pull it out by hand. Then you know your shaft is engaged firmly in the mechanism. The best way to do this is to grab the gun, whichever gun you have, by the actual stock of the gun, and then put one hand up on the shaft and just try to pull the shaft in and out of the mechanism. You can wiggle it back and forth a few times like that and you feel it clicking back and forth. You know it's locked in and you know you're ready to load your spear gun. Okay, finally out the back there, no more waves breaking. Safe place to load the gun. Load up all 3 bands and start hunting. So now that your spear gun is loaded and your safety is off and you're in the zone, the fish are around, never ever rest your finger on the trigger. So this is a good example here, diving down, finding a nice spot on the bottom. You'll see me position in a good spot here, kind of waiting for something to come through. And just for a good example here, I have my finger resting on the trigger, which is not what you want to do. I get startled, and sure enough, the gun goes off. This is what we're trying to avoid. So always carry your spear gun with your finger either extended on the side of the gun or holding your gun upside down like this, holding the handle so that your fingers aren't anywhere near the trigger. And then once you're in position and you see the fish that you're after, you can transition and slowly move your finger to that trigger position. That way, you don't have any danger of misfiring your spear gun. So just like with shooting any kind of a weapon, before you take the shot on the fish you're shooting at, always be aware of what is behind that. It's not uncommon for your spear gun to penetrate through the fish you're shooting at. Always be aware that there's nothing behind the fish that you don't want to shoot. And if there is, always wait until you have a clear shot. The next thing to always consider when you're transporting your spear gun out of the water, make sure you put some type of tip protector on that tip to make sure you don't accidentally stab yourself or one of your friends. You can use anything, piece of rubber like spear gun rubber, or this is a little piece of like vinyl float line. Riffe also has a little red rubber tip protector that comes with a lot of their equipment. Definitely make sure you got one of these. It'll save you a lot of pain and injury in the future. Anytime you're gonna use your spear gun, you should always conduct a real quick pre-dive inspection where you kind of just check your whole gun for any kind of damage or breaks. It's not uncommon for baggage handlers or if your gun was shipped for any kind of damage to have occurred. So just take a really quick look. Check down at the handle, make sure there's no cracks or breaks there. Check the reel if you have a reel. Check the wood of the gun, make sure it hasn't got cracked or split or anything that could have occurred since your last usage. Check your bands, make sure that they're not corroded just from sitting in the garage for too long. Make sure that they just don't look like they're coming apart. As long as everything looks good, you should be good to go, but always give it a really quick check and make sure everything looks like it's in good shape. So you should never ever fire your spear gun out of the water. There's lots of videos online that show people doing this and show horrific results. A lot of bad things can happen. Your shaft can go much further than expected. Your shaft can bounce off of something and come back at you, or even your shaft could just get to the end of your shooting line, come tight and recoil right back at you, causing, possibly you could get impaled by your own spear. Not worth it. Don't do it. Another lesser known consideration when loading your spear gun is to always make sure that all of your bands are loaded. So whatever spear gun you're shooting, if it has 3 bands, load all 3 of them. If you don't load all of your bands, there's a chance that when you shoot the shaft, it could get hung up in that unloaded band and cause the shaft to ricochet back at the diver. So if you're gonna shoot your gun with less bands, just take one of them off. Final considerations before shooting your spear gun: make sure that your float line or bungee, if you have one, isn't tangled around you in any way before pulling the trigger. If you're tangled and then you shoot the fish, once that fish takes off, there's a good chance you or some of your gear is going with it. So just always take a second, make sure you're clear of your lines. And lastly, always make sure that your spear gun is firmly braced before pulling the trigger. When you pull the trigger, your shaft is going to leave your gun as the bands contract, and the butt of the gun will kick back a little bit. If you're braced, you got a nice solid hand on your gun. Some people even like to put a fist or a hand on the back of the butt there. That'll keep the gun from kicking back at all, and that way you don't have to worry about your gun possibly kicking you in the face. For instance, if you were going to take a shot with the gun, in a dangerous position, like right in front of your face. So always make sure your spear gun is unloaded when you're entering the water. Whether you're jumping off the side of a boat or whether you're transiting through a surf zone, just make sure you swim through that whole area until you're in a nice, calm section of water, away from the boat, away from the waves, before you start loading that spear gun. Always make sure to unload your spear gun before either handing it back onto the boat, getting onto the boat yourself, or transiting back through the surf zone when you're done diving. When you do this, make sure that you pull the bands back with 2 hands, just like you did to load, and then extend your arms all the way back out as far towards the muzzle as you can before releasing the bands. This way, if you have any kind of a loading tab, you don't have to worry about your hand getting caught on that loading tab while you're getting pulled forward by the bands. Unloading the gun, I make sure to pull the bands back and then extend my arms all the way forward as far as I can before letting go of those bands. Unloaded spear gun, nice and safe for transiting back through the surf here. Doing it as safely as possible. Spins off. Gun unloaded, no chance of it going off there. Got good control over it. Not pointing it towards anyone. Easy day. As well as being aware of where your spear gun tip is when you're carrying it, you should also be aware of where your spear gun tip is when you're stowing it in a car or a boat. Always be sure to put your butt of the gun forward. That way if it stops abruptly, your gun doesn't go sliding tip into anyone on board.
Whoa, what are you doing, bro? If I slam the brakes in this minivan, this gun's going straight up here, either hitting me or going out this window hitting somebody else. We're gonna do it the other way around.
That's all we have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope these tips taught you guys something and help you guys be safer out there on the water. Thanks for watching, guys. Be safe out there.